Nathan Gill, a name that I think, honestly, everyone in the UK should at least know. Now, you may know who Nathan Gill is. You may know all about this. You may not. Nathan Gill, of course, former UKIP MEP, Brexit Party candidate, leader of the Brexit Party in Wales, and then, of course, later Reform, and then, of course, recently pled guilty to accepting Russian money for raising points of Russian propaganda in in Brussels at the time. That was, of course, highly illegal. He has been arrested for that. His sentencing is due on November the 26th, I think. So he's already pled guilty just late last week. And yet this week, it's not that there hasn't been talked about. It's not that this hasn't been talked about. It has, but there has been very suspicious uptaking from most mainstream media have been completely uninterested in this. And yet, I think this should be, quite frankly, a scandal that should have been on every single front page for the entire week. That Farage, wherever he was, whether he be in the UK or now we know he's been in the US this week, should have absolutely been hounded with these questions constantly. Any UKIP any Reform candidate should be bombarded with this question. What do you think about the Nathan Gill scandal? What do you think about this? Hey, Rupert Tice, you are an MEP with this guy. What do you think? But here's the thing. Here's the very interesting thing. I think the person we should be talking to, or at least the person who maybe journalists should maybe speak a bit more to get some more information about this, Rupert Lowe. Because remember, Rupert Lowe, no longer a Reform Party member. He's got his own weird little party that he's set up on the sidelines. However, he's not, shall we say, this week in particular, been as close-lipped as we have seen people like Zia Yusuf been about this. Not only on the BBC Sunday show saying, "Oh, Farage never knew this guy," even though they were literally showing multiple pictures of him and Farage and Nathan Gill all together. He got questioned quite in a good way. Bear in mind, praising Zach Polanski, but as I've always said, give credit where credit is due. Zach Polanski did, of course, give Yusuf quite a good grilling on the Nathan Gill stuff. Yeah, Gill stuff this week. So yeah, but so I think this should be talked about a lot more than it has been done. I think this should have been talked about a lot more than it has been done. But I want to go into Rupert Lowe's comments just in a moment that he said about this, because I think this does bring up even more questions, specifically, of course, about what Farage did know, when and where, and how he knew. Because the example Rupert Lowe brings up here is very, very, oh, really? And Farage knew nothing about this? Needs to be, I think, picked at more highly much more. I think this is a scab that Reform UK do not want pulling out. But as we've seen before in the past, this Russia stuff, as we saw during the last general election, this is the stuff that has hurt Farage very badly before. Now, I have to think, maybe Farage suddenly jetting off to the US was probably that reason. Anyway, gonna go on into this. But before we do go on into Rupert Lowe's comments, please do, of course, remember to click on the like, share, and, of course, subscribe button down below. There is, of course, the bell button as well. So do remember to ring that as well, so you get notifications of when we go live and when we drop a new video. Down below, of course, there are links to my Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, the YouTube membership button down below as well. There is, of course, the QR code for the Patreon page as well. So thank you very much to those people who do help and support the channel that way. Even if you just click the like and share button, don't forget to leave a link down below. And of course, as always, let's crack on into this because, yeah, questions need and should be asked about all this. So this was being talked about on the New World this week, and of course they were talking about, oh, what about, you know, Rupert Lowe's comments here, because they do bring up that very interesting. So where are we here? So yeah, here we are. So this week, the former, of course, Reform MEP Rupert Lowe said that now working alongside Gill, he, quote, seemed particularly interested in the Russian-Ukrainian developments, which I found peculiar. If Rupert Lowe can just hold on and turn around for a second and just moment and go, you have a bit of an interest in the developments, in the Russian-Ukrainian developments. That's kind of peculiar. If Rupert Lowe, of all people, can pick up on that, what was Farage doing? But oh yes, at the time, remember, he was constantly appearing on RT at this time. This is why this needs to be looked into, especially as this week, Farage said he expects to be the UK's next Prime Minister. That is a very worrying threat. The fact that this happened at the same time, Farage, I never knew anything about this, but Rupert Lowe can go, yeah, that's very peculiar. However, it goes on, because he also continued to say, there was one event right at the beginning of our term, which he asked me and other MEPs to attend. It had a very pro-Russian slant, with individuals who claim to be close to Putin there. Really highlights that important point. Other MEPs to attend. It had a very pro-Russian slant with individuals who claim to be close to Putin. Farage, I never knew anything about this. I wouldn't be surprised if we found out there were more events like that, which, I don't know, maybe he invited his other fellow UKIP MEPs at the time to attend. How many did they go to? What was discussed? This needs to be looked into. And hey, if Rupert Lowe is suddenly being very talkative about it, then maybe that's the guy. Maybe that's the weak link in the story. Maybe that's the area where people should be asking questions about what Farage was up to. Because I don't think Rupert Lowe has any reason now to be protective of Farage about any of this information. And if he's out openly saying this on social media, someone should talk to him about this type and ask those questions. Someone really should. I hope someone does. Anyway, he goes on to continue to say, for obvious reasons, I did not attend another such event. This, of course, might have been a bit fishy and seems to now have escaped the attention of Farage, who, of course, said this week that he expects to be Britain's next Prime Minister. I think that's really it. Don't think it has any other things on this. Talks about looking at some of his social media, about some of his comments that he's made. And of course, this also happened. Farage was tweeting out when he was questioned about this at PMQs when this was brought up. Keir Starmer said, the member for Clacton and his deputy, of course, worked allied worked alongside someone who took money to spread Putin's propaganda. Whatever their denials, they have now serious questions to answer about what they knew. To which Farage said in that response, yet another session of PMQs where I get mentioned but cannot respond. There is not much point me even being there. Why weren't you there? That's your job. Like, that is your job as an MP to be in Parliament, but you're never there. He was off in America. And I think the reason why this trip to America was so expertly timed was because if he said anything, that then would have been a matter for record, which could then be picked apart. He didn't want that. Not only that, but he's complaining about, the session where I get mentioned, but I can't respond. Well, that's ridiculous. You are a MP. You could also, if you wanted to, go back to the House of Commons at another time and make a response to that. There's nothing wrong with him doing that, but he doesn't want to do that because it will be a matter for record and he will now be able to be picked apart in future. This is where, once again, as you can see, there's Nigel Farage, there's Nathan Gill, there's Richard Tice, there's Rupert Lowe. They all knew Nathan Gill. Particularly, of course, the big question should be around Tice and, of course, Farage. This line of questioning should not be stopped. It should be amplified. Now, the BBC have talked about it. I think there's a lot of people like slamming the BBC for not talking about it, but they have. But the big people who haven't talked about it, of course, the Mail, Telegraph, Sun, GB News, they're the ones who haven't talked about it at all. I mean, at all. They have done nothing, absolutely nothing about this. So I think there is a lot more there to uncover. And once again, you're just going to keep on picking at that thing, people. If you're an investigative journalist, well, hey, time to do some investigation on that. I hope this becomes a more bigger story. It seems like it should be a lot bigger story than the coverage it got this week. I feel it should have been covered all this week. And I'll tell you what, if I were Keir Starmer, next week, PMQ's there, ask him to put forward the same question. Let him answer on the record. Let him see what he says. Someone needs to go to speak to Rupert Lowe. Because if I were a journalist, I'd go straight to Rupert Lowe after seeing those comments, and I would get everything I could out of Rupert Lowe about Nathan Gill and events with Nigel Farage going to them or being at those events. What was said at those events? Now, you only said you went to one, but what was discussed? What was talked about? Oh, it had a very pro-Russian slant. What were they saying? What were they discussing? Questions like that need to be, I think, start to ask more about. I hope this is just like the scratching of the surface, because it does feel like it. It does really, really much feel like it. But as always, let me know what you think about all this. Do, of course, remember to click on the like and especially the share button, because I feel this story does need to be talked about more. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And, of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.